Good evening, everyone. Thank you for watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. I'm your host, Joe Abadi. I'll be telling you more about the guests we have tonight and the topic of our discussion. But first, I want to thank the people that makes this show possible. Motion Pro, Vmxq, Preston Petty Products, Full Circle Racing, Bill's Pipes, Sunrise Vapor Blasting, Northwest Mako CZ, and of course, Racer X Magazine. The International Motocross Museum is a project that's been taken on by Terry Good. Terry has amassed a multi-million-dollar collection of motocross bikes, and he wants to be able to show them to everybody, for all of us to enjoy. He's also got an incredible amount of memorabilia that goes along with that. With that project, it takes more than just Terry Good to make that happen. So my guest today will be talking more about how they're helping facilitate the International Motocross Museum. I want to introduce to you my guests today, Tom Miller, Dave Arnold, and Gunnar Lindstrom.
Thank you, Joe. We appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. It's good to be here.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here.
Tom, let's begin with you. What is it that you do exactly there as the project manager at the International Motocross Museum?
Yeah, I have been a project manager for the better part of the last 35 years, working a lot of Air Force space programs and space programs for defense contractors. I'm a certified program manager with both the United States government and with Raytheon Technologies, my current employer. Been doing this for a very long time, and of course, I've had a passion for motocross since I was 14 years old, and I just think it's a perfect fit. I want to see this museum open up soon.
Well, Tom, let me ask you this. How did you actually get involved with Terry from the beginning, and how were you involved with the museum, either on a day-to-day basis or just in general?
Absolutely. So, like many young men in the 1970s, I got bitten by the motocross bug.
Sure.
And in the early high school, I worked for a local Kawasaki dealership, and I had a little G5 100 that I beat to within inches of its life racing. Then we got the F11, F12M prototypes in that Kawasaki was introducing in '73. I got to ride those some. And then I got one of the first 74 KX250 production bikes that came out and raced local pro. I was a decent local pro, but I finally realized in 1979, and I rode Kawasaki's, Hondas, Suzuki's, and Yamahas all during that period.
Okay.
I realized in 1979 that a good local pro is not really enough to make a living racing motorcycles. So I joined the Air Force. Joined the Air Force in 1980, got into the space business, and in 1987 was assigned to the LA Air Force Base, working, again, satellites, satellite ground systems, that kind of thing. And that's where I learned program management skills. When I retired from the Air Force, I moved back to the Midwest and started working for a defense contractor. But I've never... Go ahead.
No, go on.
But I've never lost my passion for motocross, especially in the 1970s and 1980s.
Tom, let me ask you this then. What is it that qualifies you to take on a project of this magnitude? I mean, it's a multi-million-dollar operation. It's going to be really big. What qualifies you to take on a project like this?
As a matter of fact, I'd planned to go to the event last October, and due to things that happened around the house, I couldn't go. So when Terry put his flash drive video out for sale, of course, I ordered one of those, and it came to the house, and I couldn't install it on my MacBook. And so I sent Terry an email and said, hey, there's a problem with this thing. It won't run on my Mac. Well, Terry calls me out of the blue, and we start talking, and I just told him, I said, I think this museum is the best thing ever. I want to be part of it if I can. It has grown from there. Terry and I speak a couple, 3 times a week. We share ideas, and I just think this museum absolutely needs to be built. We need to preserve our history, and I'm just honored to be part of it.
Well, Tom, the project itself, the International Motocross Museum, it has been discussed for many, many years, but it seems now to be really getting some momentum and growing a little bit faster. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think COVID slowed things down quite a bit. I think, there was some good momentum going back in 2019, and then 2020 hit. Everything got shut down with COVID, and it just kind of put everything on hold. And I think with the event that happened last October, a lot of people are aware that we're trying again. I think Dave may talk more about this, but I think yesterday Terry went to look at a building he's planning to buy. It's 100,000 square feet. Yeah, I think Terry had a building back in 2019 or 20 that was 46,000 square feet. And they
Yes.
realized very quickly that that was just not going to be big enough. Uh, to understand, this museum is not just going to be rows and rows of motorcycles. This museum is going to be a history of our sport. We're going to take the person walking in that door from 1924 to modern times. How did we get where we are? What happened in the 1970s? As we all know, that was a much different era, right?
Sure.
Privateers like me camped in tents. The pros were in box vans. So it's a much different world than it was now. We want to preserve that. We want the person that comes to this museum to live that experience with us. That's our intent.
Yeah.
Okay, my next question, Tom, I had to think about it a little bit, and I did come up with, I think, something that applies. I have seen on Facebook, on social media, certain comments. You've probably seen or heard them as well. There are people who are cynical. There are some that are just envious. Some will say, if Terry Good is in such a financial position to buy all those bikes, well, why doesn't he put the money behind the museum himself? What do you think about that? What are some of your thoughts?
That's a fair question, but I think we need to remember we're not building Terry Good's museum. We're building
Right.
our museum.
Okay.
Terry has invested a tremendous amount of money in this marvelous collection of motorcycles he has. He's willing to loan those motorcycles to the museum for the general public. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
a museum is not a money-making organization. It's not like you invest the money with hopes of getting a return. We just simply want to get the doors open.
Okay.
And it's not Terry's museum, it's our museum. So, and I think people who think that he should pony up his own money, I mean, he's going to be loaning probably millions of dollars worth of motorcycles to the museum. I think that's pretty much his skin in the game, and I think that's fair. We need to get corporate involved, but we want a lot of grassroots support because, again, we're building our museum.
Okay.
It needs to be for all of us to preserve the history of the thousands of us who strapped a leg over a motorcycle in the 1970s through today and kept this sport alive and made it what it is today. This is going to be our museum, not Terry's.
Thank you, Tom. Let's move on to Dave Arnold. Dave, you grew up in Southern California. Your dad was an engineer. How did you get involved in motocross? When did it all begin for you?
Well, I probably fell into it a bit, but I ended up going to a trade school because that was my passion. Like a lot of us at that period of time, I started riding dirt bikes, had a lot of interest in dirt bikes and the sport as it came to America, and I ended up going to a trade school to learn about motorcycle techniques and mechanics. And then working at Honda shops, and then I got a call from interview at it was Yamaha International first, their motocross team, and then to be a mechanic for Mike Hartwig didn't work out, and then I ended up interviewing an American Honda, and then it did to be a shop mechanic. So
You had a long career at Honda, Dave. How did you get that first job at Honda? What did that take?
well, it was probably the perfect timing. I mean, all these I don't know that the manufacturers really had a background in racing. I mean, of course, Honda did. It was more Isle of Man, more road racing in Europe, but motocross was a new sport in the U.S. and I think the factories were just putting together teams at the time for because the sales started to just skyrocketed when the Japanese started getting involved in the early '70s, late '60s, early '70s, and so
Is that when you were there, Dave? You first went to work for Honda in what,
yeah,
72,
yeah. I
73?
started. I started in '74, like 2/3 of the way through '74.
Okay.
And at first, I was a shop mechanic, and I actually didn't have a very secure knowledge of what the sport was at the time. I mean, the team was out on the road. I think there was 7 factory riders at the time, and there was all kinds of motors broken down in the shop. They just needed somebody to work on practice bikes. I think there was like a big blue plywood shelf, and it had about 25 or 30 motors that were transmissions or cranks or something was not working properly. So they were like, gave me a parts manual and a solvent tank and a toolbox, and they said get at it. So
Working with Marty Smith during the 70s must have been an incredible experience. Marty, such a talented writer. What can you tell me about Marty, what it was like working with him, and some of the bikes that you worked on with Marty? I think you were his mechanic a little, I think toward the end of 1975 after John R., correct?
yeah, John R. was Marty's championship mechanic for both 125 titles, 74 and 75.
Okay.
And I think toward the end of 75, if memory serves me correctly, John R. didn't want to maybe travel as much for the year and didn't want to travel the Trans Am. Marty and I were getting along pretty good. So and Marty was going to ride a 500. It wasn't going to be the sport class. So he was going to ride the international class. I think that was the end of 75. So I was his mechanic then. And it was on people talk a lot about the Type 1s and the Type 2s. It was on the previous generation, the older bikes, with the black motors and, it's more of a, one of the original style chassis, not more of the updated chassis from the mid 70s. And
Okay.
we ended up winning one of the Trans Ams, which was a bit of a surprise to me. I mean, it was more the 125. Hannah was racing at the time in the 500 class, and Marty, and I think their riding style coming from the 125s. I mean, I remember Roger telling me back at the time he never really saw guys doing big power slides and clutching the bikes like these American guys were doing at the time. But we ended up beating Roger, the Europeans, in Herman, Nebraska, which was kind of a big deal at the time. But it was fun working for Marty. I mean, there was a friendship. I think Marty was friends with everyone though, but we got along really good and did things outside of work and of course during work and race times.
You spent a year with Roger DeCoster in Europe. I think it was 1980. Tell me what it was like to be an American in Europe and working alongside Roger DeCoster there in what really was, Belgium, of course, his home country, but throughout Europe where he is so popular.
That was 1980, and so
1980.
Marty parted ways. I mean, Marty got a pretty bad injury. He also came back and won a 500 title in 77. We almost won a 250 title, and we were leading in 76, but we had a DNF at Redbud. So then Tony DiStefano won that. Marty came back and won a 500 title in 77, and but he got injured at the Houston Astrodome. I think that was in 78 and on. I mean, he raced after that, but I think that was a level of pain, and it was a big enough injury that it kind of freaked Marty out and probably took him off the cutting edge, and changed his trajectory a little bit for future championships.
So
then Honda was getting more. I mean, I think their development was kind of spotted in the 70s. I don't know if they had engineering teams that were fully designated during the 70s. They probably gathered up everybody. Okay, this is another project. What do we need to do? And somebody work on the plan, and somebody work on the blueprints. It seemed to me that some of the times it got farmed. It wasn't a consistently development program. I think one year in 78, they contracted out to Mugen even, which was Honda's, Soichiro Honda's son, Hirotoshi. It was his aftermarket companies. But in any case, in 80, they hired DeCoster. They had actually tried to hire DeCoster before his second Suzuki contract back in 70, at the end of 75, maybe before 75, right around they did a big secret test, and they had him ride all the open bikes they were trying to develop, but he stuck with Suzuki for another term. But I think toward the end of the 70s, Roger wasn't winning as much, and Honda wanted to get serious about development, and so they ended up making an agreement with him for, like, I don't know, I think it was a 10-year period.
Right.
So Roger, I was his mechanic in Europe. I mean, that's where the premier forms of racing were, and some of the Americans, that's kind of where we aspired to. We wanted to go see that. We wanted to experience that. And, the Grand Prix were the roughest tracks, and the factories were probably doing the most development in Europe at the time. So kind of wanted to be a part of it. And when they hired Roger, I think they had a week-long test in Southern California. At the last day of the test, I went up to him, and I didn't know what his current mechanic, a Swedish guy, Eula, was going to be doing for the following year, but it sounded like he wasn't going to be traveling. He was going to stay in Sweden and work for Orleans. So I went up to Roger and said, I'd really like to go to Europe and work with you for next year. And that's the way it panned out.
Were you there as a team manager, Dave, or were you Roger's mechanic?
No, as his mechanic.
Oh, okay.
Really, there wasn't much of even a European race shop at the time for Honda. I mean, parts would come into Belgium distributor or the German distributor, and we basically were, there was 3 riders that year. There was Graham Noyce from England, there was Andre Malherbe. He was another Belgian, and then of course Roger. And then I think Roger's role was more in development than counting on him to win the championship. It was really up to him. There was the LPL at the time at HRC was this guy's name was Miyakoshi, and he was around for some of the the two-stroke development for motocross, but now he was the project leader, and he really saw Roger as having a lot of experience and being pretty grounded to help them develop some of the bikes and some of the new technology. And I think he really wanted Roger to help with the development, but also mentor some of the younger riders. And whether he raced or not, I think was kind of secondary.
Yeah.
So,
Dave, I'd like to talk a little bit about the works bikes and the production rule that came in the 80s. How did the AMA production rule change racing, in your opinion?
it changed a bit, but honestly, whether it's a handmade bike or a production-based bike, I mean, it's really, in my mind, whether it be a mechanic or a team manager, I mean, it's just a tool, and it's got to work and make the rider feel confident. It's capable of winning races, and honestly, what I did miss is that there was some flexibility with works regulations. I mean, you could, and of course, the engineers were willing to do some of the crazy stuff that we came up with. We were changing
Sure.
castings and going from piston port to case reeds to we were trying all kinds of stuff, and it allowed all this. I mean, the amount of testing and the amount of development over that 10-year period, I just can't imagine anybody wanting to take that on again. I mean, it was just but you know sometimes, to answer that question, I mean, you still have a lot of work to set up even a production-based bike to the level of
Sure.
what these guys need for professional racing. But one thing that production regulation does do is, if let's say your base is a little bit off, and sometimes it's really hard to get all of that stuff sorted out. Even you can test and test and test, but it's not until you go racing you really find out where you're at. And there's been
Now,
cases where
do,
the production bike has been a little bit off, once it comes out, and as a base for what you're going to use for professional racing, and then it's kind of hard to tweak at that point in time. So I would say it wasn't hugely different, but it took away some of the flexibility for regrouping if things weren't 100%. So
but did it level the playing field, Dave? Did it help privateers?
which one?
I said, did it level the playing field? Did it help privateers?
I think that's the perception. I don't know. I guess we'd probably have to ask some of the guys. I mean, some of the guys that tried to claim bikes, whether it was Mickey Boone or a few other guys. I
Right.
mean, honestly, I thought, working actually for a factory, anybody that showed any potential at all, there was so many opportunities to get support at that point, in the late 70s and early 80s. And I mean, to me, those guys ended up on amateur support programs or, B-level pro programs. And I mean, the factories were looking for any talent. They were afraid of another Marty Smith or Hannah. And I mean, I remember Mark Barnett being an up and coming guy in the Michigan, Detroit area. And, I mean, it didn't take him any time at all to secure a Suzuki ride, and, everybody else wanting him at the same time. So, I mean, I kind of personally don't think it changed much of anything for the average rider. I could be off.
Okay.
Okay, now let's talk about the International Motocross Museum. Dave, how exactly did you get involved in it? What is your role there?
I think I'm more of it started out, I had a pretty big role, but I mean, this thing was, Terry and I have, I think, shared the vision of bringing this thing to reality. We've been friends for probably 30 years, and when I was Marty's mechanic or when I was the race team manager, I mean, he was a Mugen distributor for a period of time. He had his own race team for a period of time, but he's always been an enthusiast of works bikes or that
Sure.
equipment. Everybody that's sort of a fan of the sports kind of looks back at some of the exotic stuff that was developed in the 70s and 80s, and it is collectible, and it is a piece of history that we would all like to share. And I think from that point till now, I mean, we've talked on a friendly and enthusiast level of where all these bikes are at and what would be a cool bike to obtain. And he's actually had a knack for beating the bushes and figuring out where all that stuff is and trying to get it, sent to Chicago, which he's done a pretty good job at it. And so now it's transitioned into trying to put together some kind of this museum to reflect all of this history. And, you know, I think right now it's getting to a level of we do need expertise to help. There's some specialization for actually what how it runs. I don't really have that. So I would actually say my title is more of a technical historical consultant at this
Okay.
point. Gunnar's really, and one thing that changed too is my brother got really sick a couple of years ago, and I had to step in and run his machine shop, and I was begging Gunnar to help fill in some of the gaps, and he's done a fantastic job of trying to help coordinate and general manage a lot of this activity needed to get this thing to another level.
Yeah. Now, Dave, you said that there are other people who specialize in actually assembling a museum, the flow of people, and how it should look. Have you been talking to people like that?
Are you asking me again?
Yes, I am, Dave.
Yeah, we've been, and that's probably, I'm kind of a gearhead kind of a guy. And yes, we have been beating the bushes for, whether it's a Peterson or whether it's a Barber, whether it's, I don't know that we have a lot of experience as to making that next step. I think that path is becoming more clear as we get into it, whether that's fundraising, whether that's just, how we deal with sponsors and OEMs and what museums get used for, even for, doing some press launches or special events and things like that. So
Tom Miller mentioned earlier about a building being identified. What does that actually mean? What can you tell us more about the new building that Terry is working with?
Yeah, no. He has a building, and I think he's, Terry has a vision for not only just wanting to show off a bunch of bikes. He kind of wants to recreate the atmosphere of let's say a pit scene, and what the truck and what the gear and with the riders and the mechanics, and that's evolved as well. Whether the stands they use to lift the bikes and all these type of things. So he really wants, instead of having just DeCoster's bike or Marty or Bob or somebody else, he really wants to create the whole atmosphere that surrounded all that. And it's mind-boggling to me. It went from 50,000 to 100,000 square feet, but he's got a lot of stuff that he wants to show off, and so then that takes on a whole different life of his own, trying to take that step.
Yeah, I understand it was quite a bit of parts and bikes and memorabilia that he got from Roger, and that section of the museum alone is supposed to be gigantic.
Yeah, and and it just grows and grows. Every time we talk, so then we talk about, let's say, a Reby fork or anything technical. There's all these veins of, let's say, who developed upside down forks, or who developed linkage forks, or who developed the first reed valve or case, and then he'll start to search out these things. Well, then let's see if we can find a set of Reby forks. I think there was 6 or 7 or 8 of them made by Reby Valentino in Italy. So pretty soon he's secured one of those. And then I'm envisioning, like, well, that would be kind of neat to have a whole section just on front suspension and the evolution, and let's say chassis, and let's say engine. Instead of even just focusing on some bikes, let's look at the progression of the technology. So
let's move on to Gunnar Lindstrom. Gunnar, you've been very, very patient with us.
And quiet.
And quiet.
Thank you. Gunnar, I understand you're in charge of the organizing of the International Motocross Museum's next fundraiser. They had one last October. They have another one coming up in this September. Will it be the same venue? And what can you tell us about the attendees? Who can we expect to see? And will the motorcycles change? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the first one we had, everything, the first time you leave openings for things that can be different and improved and whatnot. So the first one was a huge success, and we got so much good feedback from that. Now, the second one, we will, tighten it up a little bit and make it even more successful by bridging those things that didn't go so well. And that's my part, my contribution right now, is to try to organize the event with the help of Dave and Tom, of course. But we do see two tracks right now. One is the fundraising track and the museum track itself. The other one is the promotional events, like the event here that we're talking about now on September 18,
Yes.
and other events that we may or may not announce in the near future.
Gunnar, with COVID on the decline, and so many of us are hoping that the event this year, we will be able to see some of the legendary racers from Europe that we were not able to meet last year, such as Heikki Mikkola, Garrett Walsink, maybe Harry Everts. Can you tell us for sure that they will be making it, and some of the people that will attend?
Answer yes, for sure. And
For sure.
Terry says he's already paid for the tickets. So unless something happens, we should have a good group of international champions.
Gunnar, I would imagine that once the museum is opened, it would probably be a place where other events will take place. You have any thoughts on that as far as industry people and other people in the motorcycle industry having events there, or am I a little early with that question?
Well, that's way ahead of what we've been talking about so far. But
Okay.
what I'm actually who will actually be responsible. But what we do know is that just like both Tom and Dave said, Terry's plans are very ambitious, and one of the things he envisioned is to have the historical society, the Motocross Historical Society, with a library, with books, with a picture library where you can go and search and research. So, and of course, in addition to that, each manufacturer that supports the museum will probably have a rotating display of some sort. So not just older bikes, but newer bikes to appeal to a family, for example. Some of the kids these days may not want to see bikes from the 70s and 60s, maybe more, not just for a long time anyway, but they want to see the new stuff. So it will be a broad spectrum of bikes and of interests that you can go there. So hopefully it will be a family attraction in the Chicago area.
Yeah.
Gunnar, while we're here, I'd like to ask you this. I'm hoping that you will be a guest on Vintage Motocross Radio for an upcoming episode of that. We'll talk about that more. But right now, let's talk about more about how a farm boy from Sweden got involved in motocross. How did that all take place?
Well, I went to high school, and you have your little motorbike, on the farm that we all do. And after I finished high school, I wasn't so sure exactly what I wanted to do, so I actually became an apprentice at one of the bike shops in town and learned a lot. Learned to build my own bike. Got to know the Husqvarna folks a little bit, and was a pretty decent rider in Sweden, but not one of the Torsten Holmans or Ake Johnsons, that's for sure.
Gunnar, I'm sure you raced a lot as an amateur and also on a professional level as well. But I was just wondering, were you a factory rider, or did the factory reach out for you? How did that all happen?
Well, I did win some local races and maybe a few more. But my image was, that I wanted to work at Husqvarna. That was only 45 minutes from where I grew up. So I went there and told them, like, hello, I'm here. I'm ready to go to work and be the big guy here and help you. And they say, who are you?
And this is at the factory?
Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
We kind of heard of your name somewhere. So they said, but here's the key. They said, we're not just hiring anybody. We're hiring engineers. So at the time, I was actually going through farm school or ag school, as they say here, agricultural college. And I quit within days and found an opening in an engineering school and switched to engineering. And 3 or 4 years later, I'm back knocking at the door, and I told the Husqvarna folks, hello, I'm an engineer now, hire me. And they said, wasn't you the guy that was here 4 years ago? I said, yeah. And they said, well, we'll think about it. So it took a while, and I became actually a test rider for the military bike. That was my first job, to ride, about 150 miles a day on the military bike and write reports. That was the bike we called the MC256A, which was one of the original Husqvarna Army bikes that are still, still running actually in private collections, but was still a good bike.
After being an engineer in Sweden, Gunnar, how did you wind up coming here to America to help Husqvarna spread their name throughout America. I think it was around 1968.
Exactly. So I started there at the end of '65. So '66 was my first full year with Husky, and they had an invitation from the distributorship in Australia and New Zealand. There was a group down there that organized races over the winter, and they invited me to come down, and I had to go back to Husqvarna and say, would you let me go? And they said, you know what? Excellent combination, because we want to find out what's going to happen with motocross in Australia and New Zealand. We don't know whether we want to sell bikes there or not. So they say, we'll let you go. Of course, we're not going to pay you for it. But we'll let you off the hook here. We give you some bikes. We'll send them down there, and then you can tell us when you come back exactly how things are working. So I got there, and it was my first time on an airplane. I flew from Sweden via London, Rome, and Bangkok to Australia, and it took a day and a half or so. And when I get there, I met this American guy that was supposed to be there from America, and his name was J.N. Roberts, and we became good friends. He became my first mentor in English, and we had a lot of good times, and a lot of good fun things happened there. And I actually taught him pretty well how to ride motocross, and of course vice versa. He trying to show me how to ride the desert, so it worked out for both of us. Yeah.
Now, did you come over here about the same time as Lars Larson? Because when I interviewed Lars, his story sounded very similar to yours.
Well, they are in a way. He came over here in the fall of '67. I came here in the spring of '68, and those 6 months are important because he was 6 months ahead of me, and we always joke about that. But he came as a contracted to Edison Dye to work as a technical expert, to read the Swedish manuals, that nobody here could, or few could. And also he was allowed to ride as much as he could. So he was very instrumental in getting things started here, opening Husqvarna dealerships all over the country. And if you talk to Lars, you know that he is a very entertaining guy to talk to. He's worth an hour of your time, and he'll entertain you every minute of it.
Now, Gunnar, in what I thought was a strange twist of events, you left Husqvarna in 1974, I think it was, and you went to work for Dirt Bike Magazine. Why that move? It seems kind of odd.
It was a very difficult time for Husqvarna at the time. In '72, we came out with a new bike, a new engine, new everything, and it was not as good as we'd hoped. And it also laid bare a lot of deficiencies in our development program and the way we went about to do things. In the past, we had been so successful. I used to joke about, the only difficulty we had was to decide who was going to pay for dinner on Sunday night. And then we went into this difficult period with reliability, with performance, with development direction. And the company had was not prepared, was not organized to deal with anything other than success. When we ran into difficulty, the difficulty in management, the difficulty of all of us as to what we should have done as far as contributions, as far how to deal with how you say, not winning, was difficult, and we didn't have the management in place to overcome that. It became a blame game, and I was one of the victims of it.
I see.
Gunnar, I want to get back to Tom Miller for just a second, and I want to ask him, Tom, what is the difference between a nonprofit and a not-for-profit organization, and how does that status fit the International Motocross Museum?
The International Motocross Museum will be a nonprofit, meaning what funds we raise go back into the museum to keep it going, to expand it. I think Gunnar mentioned that, or maybe it was Dave, the historical society we plan to have there, the education. So no one's going to make a dime off of this museum. Our intent is money goes back into the museum to continue growing it. And the beauty of the building we're looking to purchase now, and negotiations are going on with that building, there's a lot of room for expansion there. So as we grow, we will continue to expand the museum to bring in new historical artifacts, if you will, because this sport only has a bright future. It'll continue to grow, and we want to continue tracking and maintaining and preserving the history.
Dave, The other day when we were talking, you mentioned something to me that you have a standing appointment with Roger DeCoster, that you guys meet up once a week or so to go bicycling. How often do you do that? Where do you go? Where do you go riding?
Usually we ride. He's pretty ornery. He's a good 10 years on me, but he stays in really good shape. And I don't know. We've had a thing for years that we get together once or twice a week and beat up on each other. And there's one or two other guys that come with us.
Where do you go? Where do you ride?
Well, we usually go down. Well, during the race season, I'm kind of flexible because I'm not 9 to 5 quite as much as he is. I mean, the guy barely gets a day off a week, and he's flying to the races on every weekend. So I'll drive down there. I mean, he's willing to. I live up here near Glendale, Pasadena area, and on the off season, he'll make a trip up here, and we'll go up in the Angeles Crest and some of the canyons. And but most of the time during the season, I'll go down there because just his schedule. That's all it allows.
Dave, I was wondering, are you employed by the International Motocross Museum, or are you on salary? And how long have you been working with Terry Good on this project?
I would say it doesn't. Up until this point, it hasn't taken a huge amount. I mean, Terry and I have gone back to Chicago a few times before we even had our first event, and kind of helped him organize and work on some of the equipment. And then we went together. We went to visit Les Archer. Some of this was in preparation for the event we had last year. Les Archer was still slated to attend that. He was getting up in years, but I was putting together a program, and it kind of followed a Trailblazers event. I think it was a comment that Dave MD made. He said, he does this program, and then the event sort of follows the program. If you're gonna feature 4 or 5, well, in our case, we were featuring nearly 12, 13, 15 guys. So I put together a program. Gunnar helped with it. Zap helped with it. Terry helped with it, but we sort of did a biography. I mean, that was actually quite time consuming. That was last season in preparation for the event, but it sort of helped us kind of get our heads around what kind of an event we would have and how it would represent what the museum was slated to be, as well as the riders that were going to attend the event and the machines that we had, that were associated with each one of those athletes. So this year we've been kind of changing gears a little bit. I mean, we're going to have to get back into some of the details of the event, but we've been looking a little bit larger at securing the building and actually trying to make this thing a reality, which we've been planning on for a few years now.
Dave, will the fundraiser for this year be at the same venue? I think it was Pinstripes. Pinstripes was the name of the place. Will it be there again?
I believe that's the plan. I don't know. There's a couple things that need to be nailed down. There may be a matinee. We had a matinee program last year, and it may or may not be at Pinstripes, but I think those are some of the things that need to be nailed down.
Okay.
Tom, while I'm thinking about it, as far as donations go, can people donate now? What can they do about that if they're interested in donating now?
Absolutely. That's part of the reason we're here, Joe, is we're trying to raise awareness and, again, let our community know that we're building a museum for them to preserve the history of their sport. Right now, we are looking at grassroots fundraising. So I encourage everybody watching, everybody who's tuning in via live or via a recording, consider going to the URL up there, donating 10, 20 bucks, whatever you can afford. We need the money. It will go to a good cause. And we hope to have the doors of this thing open soon. The sooner we raise funds, the sooner the doors open to the museum. That's really the long pole in the tent right now, is getting adequate funding. Since the event in October, we've been developing a lot of documentation, like our bylaws and like a business plan, as well as a fundraising plan to engage corporate America, as well as the grassroots campaign we're working right now. But we really do need funds because this can't happen without the help of our motocross community.
Tom, what about some of the bigger manufacturers, Yamaha, Honda, Suzuki, Kawasaki, of course, and now you've got KTM, Gas. There are so many more than just a big four like there used to be. If anyone is watching from any of those places, can they get involved, and who would they talk to if they did want to become a sponsor for the IMM?
Yeah, to my knowledge, right now, we haven't really started engaging the corporate sponsors. We do plan to. That is clearly
okay.
I think it's important these are the people who made motocross what it is today. The Hondas, the Suzukis, the Husqvarnas, those guys were involved in the 70s. They built some incredible motorcycles in the 70s. They were always there. They need to be part of this museum. This is their history as much as it is our history. And we're excited to look into bringing them on board.
If there is anything else I haven't mentioned so far, or any questions that I haven't asked that you guys think are pertinent to the conversation, now would be a good time to talk about it. Gunnar, any questions?
Well, I was going to add to what Tom said. Our website is internationalmotocrossmuseum.org. And there you will find information about the bikes. There's a link to Terry's website where there is very, very long, and there's stories there written by some of the writers themselves, certainly Roger DeCoster and others. So there's a lot of information there, including how to donate, to the good cause.
Dave Arnold, anything further?
Yeah, I went my whole career spending money and trying to achieve race efforts. I'm probably the last guy to know how to acquire or save money. So I'm glad I have the help of Tom and you guys, Gunnar, and the group. But
Dave,
in any case, it's a great cause. If you could see all these bikes, and I think some of the guys that came to the event last year, they did. I mean, I just can't wait until this thing comes to fruition, because this stuff, I mean, right now it's stuffed in a few storage lockers in a basement and every room Terry has in his house, and we need to get it out and set it up. So.
Oh, and I wanted to ask you too. Of all the bikes that are in Terry's museum, I know there are a lot of Hondas in there. I think you work with Yamaha a little bit too. How many of those bikes did you actually work on back in the day when they were on the track racing?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know how some of this stuff ever appeared, honestly. Gunnar was a race team manager. I was a race team manager. Our job was, all these bikes came into the country on what they call a TIB. It's a temporary import bill, and it had to be sent back to the country of origin or destroyed. And boy, but to answer your question, I mean, I've seen bikes of Cars Maker had in there. I mean, I worked on those. I think there's a video somewhere, a movie of me working on that bike in a hotel room in a Trans Am race.
Yeah.
And Pierre and Cars Maker and Jim Pomeroy, and I mean, I don't know, all the Honda bikes, almost all of them, whether it was Gunnar or myself. I mean, we had our hands on them. So
yeah.
Tom, if a corporate sponsor wants to be involved, who would they contact, you or Terry Good?
They could absolutely contact me, private message me on Facebook. I am on Facebook. Or contact Terry via the museum. There's a link on the website for the museum to contact Terry. Absolutely, we'd love to hear from anybody interested in helping us out.
Okay, my guests today have been Tom Miller, Dave Arnold, and Gunnar Lindstrom, and we've been talking about the progress of the International Motocross Museum. And Tom, you know what? While I'm thinking about it, what is a possible opening date for this museum? Do we have one?
Depending on fundraising, our schedule right now has the doors opening in the summer of 2025.
Okay.
If our fundraising accelerates fast enough, we could open the doors in the summer of 2024.
Well, with so many things really, really falling into place, I know there's a lot more work to do, but I want to thank Tom Miller, Dave Arnold, and Gunnar Lindstrom for being my guests today on Vintage Motocross Q&A, and we look forward to speaking to you guys again in the future about the International Motocross Museum. I'm Joe Abadi. You've been watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much.
thank you, Joe. You too. Thanks.